based on the content of my talk to give a presentation that's being streamed entirely from my phone. So please bear with us as if the technology doesn't pan out quite as well as we hope, but hopefully it should work okay. I'm a software person by training, I suppose, and by trade. I'm an entrepreneur and a software designer, and I spend a lot of time reading tech news, as one might in that field. And I don't know how many of you guys have been watching the streams coming across this week, but it's been really interesting for me to see discussion about CES, because it seems like perhaps more than ever before, there's a lot of criticism of CES as being, in a way, irrelevant. And every time somebody talks about CES in this way, it seems to kind of come down to one form or another of this argument that CES is effectively a conference about hardware in a world where software is increasingly dominating. Perhaps you've heard this term that gets thrown around a lot, that software eats hardware. It's this idea that eventually any dedicated product that has a traction in the market will have its market share eaten by a piece of software that is dedicated to doing the same thing. I think one other way of thinking about this problem, or this phenomenon, is not that software is eating hardware, but that computers, or generic computers, are slowly replacing many of the other dedicated devices that we use on a regular basis. So rather than thinking of it specifically as software eating hardware, we might be able to think of it as the computer, this concept of a machine that does a lot of different things, eating many specialized devices that came before it, or that had market share before it moved in. One very good example of this that gets cited a lot is photography. Apple's iPhones in particular have been very successful in terms of penetrating the market. If we define a market as the people who take pictures, even on sites like Flickr that historically have not been well connected with Apple devices, the runaway tools that people take pictures on and submit onto that site are increasingly iPhones more than anything else. So if you're Canon, for example, and you're selling point-and-shoot cameras, this is obviously a big problem. There's still a fair market share for larger digital SLRs because they have certain capacities that an iPhone doesn't. But as many of us have watched the point-and-shoot market decay, it's this concept of an app on one's phone really swallowing something that historically belonged to an entire market segment. Personally, I don't think this is a bad thing. I think it's actually a very interesting phenomenon that we can embrace and pay attention to and think about in a way that actually opens up new opportunities. Because I guess I would side with an early Steve Jobs on this idea that the computer is really the pinnacle of human creation. It's the best tool that man has ever made. And it's still evolving, and it's evolving in specific ways. But before we talk about the ways it's evolving, I want to just set a context for this idea. So I'm going to try and stream a video wirelessly from a phone's projector. We'll see if this works. But this is Steve talking very early on about what a computer is.
I think one of the things that really separates us from the high primates is that we're tool builders. And I read a study that measured the efficiency of locomotion for various species on the planet. The condor used the least energy to move a kilometer. And humans came in with a rather unimpressive showing, about a third of the way down the list. It was not too proud of showing for the crown of creation. So that didn't look so good, but then somebody at Scientific American had the insight to test the efficiency of locomotion for a man on a bicycle. And a man on a bicycle, or a human on a bicycle, blew the condor away, completely off the top of the charts. And that's what a computer is to me. What a computer is to me is, it's the most remarkable tool that we've ever come up with. And it's the equivalent of a bicycle for our minds.
This idea, I think, that the computer is the bicycle that we all carry with us now, is really essential, I think, to embracing this shift of software eating hardware. And I thought what we could talk about today was a framework for thinking about the way that the computer has slowly encroached upon so many other parts of the consumer electronics world by looking at three epochs or eras in this process, three major shifts that have happened in the way that the computer has played a role in our lives. And by looking at it in that way, I would argue we're in the third. We could talk about some opportunities that shift creates. Basically, every time one of these moments happen, every time one of these shifts occurs, there's a tremendous amount of innovation around it. And the fact that we're in one of them right now, I think, is actually a really exciting thing. So the first shift was the invention of the personal computer. It seems kind of silly to us today to think about a world where there wasn't a personal computer, but if we all go way, way, way back to the early days, there was a time when this was a radical concept. In fact, there's a quote from, I believe, 1958, Tom Watson, who was the CEO of IBM at the time, famously saying that he believed that there was a world market for about 5 computers. Obviously, that's turned out to be a bit of an underestimation. But this was the problem that early computer companies faced, was convincing your average person that a personal computer was something that they might actually want and make use of. Here's an early ad. It's a little hard to see because the way the screen is letterboxing, but an early ad that shows Ben Franklin sitting in front of a Mac, and it talks about what kind of a man owns his own computer. There was a dedicated marketing engine at work trying to convince people that these things were actually going to be useful for individuals, because that was not something that was in any sense widely believed to be true. Obviously, personal computers have become a big part of our lives, and the rest is very much history. But that first wave eventually opened us to a second wave, where the personal computer, lots and lots of personal computers spread out all over the place, became networked. They became the networked personal computer. And this was the innovation wave that I think, among other things, kind of have brought us all together in new forms of communication and all the rest. Many people have said that the web is the greatest invention that man has ever made, and I think there's something to be said for that idea that all of these machines, when they come together, they create something that I don't think anyone ever could have imagined beforehand. Again, this is all old news to us. We're all very familiar with the web and all the rest, but it's hard to imagine a world now where this doesn't exist, but there was a time when this was just crazy. It was just ludicrous, the idea that there was something called the internet. I want to share another quick video with you. This one's from the Today Show, NBC, I believe in the late 90s. Let me see, I can check my notes here and tell you that.
Back in the 56 pass, I wasn't prepared to translate that. This was to have all the T's. And the mark with the A, and then the ring around it, at. See, that's what I said. Katie said she thought it was about. Yeah. But I've never heard it. I've never heard it said. I said the mark, but never heard it said. And then it sounded stupid when I said it. Why was NBC?
Yeah, I heard you around here about the ones you're
See, there it is. Violence, NBC, GE.com. I mean,
well, Allison should know.
what is the internet anyway?
Internet is the massive computer, the one that's becoming really big now.
What do you mean? It's big. What do you write to it like mail?
No, a lot of people use it to communicate. I guess they communicate with NBC, writers, and producers. Allison, can you explain what internet is?
No, she can't say anything in 10 seconds or less.
Oh, Allison will be in the studio shortly.
What is it?
It's a giant computer network made up of starting from.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell us what this was. I was going to do that for it.
It's not. It's a computer billboard, but it's
Right.
like several universities worldwide.
Right.
And others can access it.
Right.
It's getting bigger and bigger.
Just
It was
right.
really heavy during the quake. A lot of people, that's how they were communicating out to tell family and loved ones they were okay because the phone lines were down.
I was telling Katie the
But
other
you don't
day.
need a phone line to operate the internet? No, apparently
I
not.
was telling Katie.
That's Brian Gumbel and Katie Couric in 1994. These are smart people. They're not idiots. It was just that this was such a foreign concept at its time. It's really hard for us to go back to that place, but this was such a big shift. It took people a while to get their heads around it, to get their heads around this idea that there was some kind of cyberspace out there that was created by all these machines being connected to one another that allowed for all this interaction that hadn't been possible before. And of course, now we're living in a world where that internet is available to us at all times. And I think that moment is a very, very important one as well, because there's another shift that's happening. Prior to smart devices, smartphones being ubiquitous and usable, the personal computer that was networked was only personal in the sense that it was property, in the sense that it belonged to someone. It wasn't personal in the sense that it was on your person or in any way enhanced person. You had to be sitting at a desk or at least having a machine in your lap in order to be able to take advantage of or be a part of the network of these personal devices. But once we have smartphones, another always on, always connected and always connected to us devices, we enter this third phase, this third era, if you will, where the networked personal computer gives way to this person-computer hybrid that is also networked. That is, each of us becomes networked. And we're networked through a somewhat symbiotic relationship between the devices that we keep on our person at all times and ourselves. It's a crazy idea. When you think about it and really push on it, the smartphone is like the very beginning of some kind of science fiction, cyborg sort of world. We all have access to Google and all the world's knowledge at all times right now. It's in our pocket, and we have to interface with it through a piece of glass, but it's there, and it's always there. And that's a very, very different thing than has ever existed before. So I would argue that we're in the middle of this new emerging era. The smartphones that are now sort of growing like crazy are really setting up the first critical mass piece of this epoch or this era, and that's why there's so much great innovation coming out. And I thought what we could do today is talk about the sort of five, or not the five, but one of the things I learned by giving talks is if you break things into numbered chunks, everybody's a little bit more interested. So I'm going to break stories into five opportunity areas where I think looking at the world in this way and really embracing this one specific change actually opens up amazing opportunities, not only in software that needs hardware, but actually in hardware itself as well. So let's run through that very quickly. The first one is the obvious one, and that is the opportunity for hardware that connects, hardware that makes that person-computer hybrid possible. And the first one that we are all very familiar with is our smartphone. I was waiting in line this morning at Starbucks, and here at CES, the line for Starbucks is disturbingly long, even when no one's here. And every single person in line was biding their time by staring at a little glass screen in their hands. Every single one. It was kind of unbelievable as a mass movement. It's just simply unthinkable anymore to go anywhere and not have one of these devices on you to help you fill the gaps and to be available when people need to get a hold of you. Wow, you can't actually see this at all because of the contrast of the display, but Microsoft last year, their entire revenue was $73 billion, and the iPhone alone was responsible for $74 billion worth of revenue for Apple. So this is a really, really, really big deal, obviously. And iPhones themselves are just beginning, as I'm sure we're all aware. Android has been taking off globally at a much larger clip, and it's almost unbelievable the rate at which Android devices are getting adopted. This is a huge, huge segment of the world that is getting online in this way, many of whom have never actually been chained to a desk that was hooked to the internet. So the scope we're talking about here is almost unbelievable. And not only is the software hardware, but mobile computing is itself eating prior forms of computing, so desktop computing. This is a graph of web browsing in India, and you can see that sort of as we get towards 2012, a tipping point happens where there are more web pages being viewed in India on a mobile device than on a web browser on a standard computer. Obviously, India is in many ways different than the rest of the world, but you can see this as a canary in the coal mine for what's happening more broadly. Every major publication in the United States and the Western world has seen significant portions of their readership shift to mobile devices, primarily iOS devices, probably because of usability reasons. And this trend is only going to continue. So we can think of these devices as not only being a huge new thing in and of themselves, but really eating the old market as well. The phone itself is one manifestation of this kind of computer, and lots of people have envisioned lots of other ones. None of them have really taken off in any meaningful way yet, but we're starting to see little bits of it. There's rumors of an Apple Watch. Whether or not that happens, I think is an interesting question. certainly people are talking about it. Several other smart watches were launched or demoed this week at CES, including the Pebble, which I think still holds the record for raising more money on Kickstarter than any other project ever. Something in excess of $10 million. Do you remember how much Pebble raised? Well, anyway, quite a bit. So there's the idea of taking the screen and making it smaller and more easily accessible. There's also the idea of moving more towards something cyborg-like. This is Sergey modeling Google Glass. We've probably all seen this. I've had a chance to try one of these. It's very strange, and you can always tell when someone's looking at them because some folks refer to it as glassing out. The eyes kind of get slightly cross-eyed, and the person looks like they're in a bit of a daze. In general, this is a very, very socially awkward experience right now. I would say it exemplifies the best and worst of Google. There's a massive eagerness to try and push the envelope here on what's possible, and really not enough attention being paid to the human social pieces of this. But maybe through this something different will come. In fact, lots of people have envisioned less socially awkward versions of this, not the least of which is to embrace the concept of sunglasses and carry them one step further. We don't see anyone's eyes when they're wearing sunglasses anyway. You can put a lot more hardware in there, and people wearing sunglasses tend to look cool. So there are ways that this might evolve, and it's an interesting concept right now, probably a little more than that, but you can imagine the hardware components of this person-computer hybrid continuing to evolve as we move forward. Push really far into that. There's early research happening around technologies that are a bit more invasive in the sense that they become quite deeply integrated to our person, and somebody else other than me can probably take this audience down a much longer road of what happens when you really try and push this whole cyborg idea. But here's a contact lens that's got LCD output baked right into it, and you could theoretically imagine that printing on your eye. I'm not quite sure how we would focus, but maybe they have figured that out. So that's a quick smattering of the kinds of thinking around increasing this person-computer hybrid that is starting to emerge. I think something that's even more interesting, though, is what happens once we have one form or another of this connection to the mesh, to the net, always on us. And that's this idea of new kinds of software that haven't really been possible before. I'm friends with a guy who launched an app earlier this year called Highlight, and I was an early tester on it, and I'm also an app designer, so I spend a lot of time looking at apps and thinking a lot about how they work. And when I first beta tested this product called Highlight, well, actually, since it's a phone, I can just pop this out and show it to you. Let's see if this works. Yeah, okay, cool. So here's Highlight. Highlight is basically a sixth sense, if you will. I keep Highlight on my phone, and other people that are running Highlight that the system thinks I might find interesting. When they're physically proximate to me, my phone goes off and tells me that somebody that I might find interesting or one of my friends is nearby. So it's a social radar, if you will, that's on all the time. What's interesting about this, though, from a design perspective, is when you first install Highlight, it asks you for your Facebook login so it can kind of crawl your social network. And then the next screen, it tells you to turn it off. It says, okay, thank you. I'll tell you when there's something important for you to know now. Bye-bye, go outside and play. And it was the first time I'd ever seen an app that had intentionally tried to make you go away at some point. The premise being that the model, the user experience model of Highlight is really one of like a personal assistant. It's this idea that we've set up our relationship, we've achieved that part of the app's goals. Now put the app in the background, and the app will be doing its job ambiently in the background. And if a moment comes where there's something that you need to hear about, the app will come back online and tell you. That's an agent kind of metaphor. Obviously, there were a lot of early concepts of agents with personal computers, but an agent that can be with you all the time is a very, very different thing. And I think it opens up a door to a lot of software opportunities. Perhaps the most famous one is Siri. Siri has been definitely much more of a success from a marketing perspective than it has from an actual usability and design perspective. In fact, I'd argue that if Siri was a real personal assistant, any of us who have tried her would have let her go a long, long time ago. The promise is that through natural language, you can have a very normal interaction with your phone, fact, there are a number of things that Siri is able to do that on paper are quite impressive. But the natural language processing is simply not up to snuff, and it's far too difficult for Siri to understand what you're actually asking for. So more often than not, you ask Siri to do something and she fails to do it. And so what users figure out fairly quickly is that there is something between 0 and a small number of things that they can trust Siri to do, and everything else they simply stop asking. So it's sort of like having that helper or assistant in your company that for one reason or another is sticking around, but you really don't want to interact with them except for a very, very small subset of cases that you know that they're not going to mess up. That's not a good model for software. It's over-promising and under-delivering. But if you think about the phone a bit more broadly, there has been another personal assistant on the device since it initially came out, and that's the alarm clock. So the alarm clock also does a service for you. You tell it, for example, what time you need to wake up in the morning, and it more or less guarantees that you do. The interface for it, you can switch back to the phone, it's very simple. I can just click in here and edit an alarm. And because I've got this little dial, and I can switch my alarm to 6 a.m., I know that it knows that we're on the same page, and if I click save, my alarm's going to go off at 6 a.m. in the morning. I can literally fall asleep at night and rest easy that the system's going to wake me up, because we have high transparency and we have a very clear interaction model that's basically enabling trust. And if the alarm's loud enough that it's woken me up before, that's really all I need and we're good to go. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for experiences like this, that is to say specialized services that do things in the background for you, because the device is always on. We'll talk about that a little bit more going forward, but when you hear personal assistant, think more alarm clock and less whiz-bang, clever voice speaking. We get to have some fun with Siri, but I'm not able to have the internet and this presentation running at the same time, unfortunately, so we'll have to skip that. Okay, so that's software that serves. So if we run to the next opportunity when we're all connected, this has been talked about in the venture community quite a bit. It's this concept that these guys are phones, but they're also remote controls for our lives, and they open up interactions that can happen at the push of a button, much like turning on the TV, but can happen in remarkable ways that were never really possible before, simply because the device wasn't easily available. A couple of examples of that. A product I used several times last year before I think they ran out of funding is called Cherry. Cherry is an app that you download on the App Store, and it pops up a little map. You tell Cherry where your car is, you press a button that agrees to pay $30, and in half an hour there's somebody at your car washing the inside and out of it for you. So it's literally like a remote control car wash that happens anywhere in the world. Uber. How many of you guys have tried or played with or seen Uber? Can I just get a show of hands? So not very many. Oh, I'm on Hotel Tonight. I'll come back to Uber. Hotel Tonight is literally it's a really interesting model in the sense that hotels can basically, starting in the middle of the day, sell excess inventory to this startup that then makes that inventory available at discount prices through the phone. But you get into a city, if you don't have a hotel room that evening, you open up the app, and only at noon that day, there's a list of hotel rooms that are available. It's extremely simple to pick one and book it. You literally just draw a signature. Instead of a signature, you draw the logo with a straight down line and kind of the bed shape there. And that's it. You're good to go. You show up at the hotel. They've got all your information. You're ready. And in terms of, it creates this feel of having basically, I would encourage you, if you don't have a hotel room for tonight, you're sticking around, or even if you do, download Hotel Tonight and try it. You'll find $30 hotel rooms, very nice ones here in Las Vegas, available sometime after midday, and you can literally, at the push of a button, book one, or I guess theoretically more. Uber was this other service I was mentioning. Uber's basically remote control for taxis. They're black cars for a number of legal reasons, although that's changing. But on this app, you can literally see a live map of every taxi that the system knows about and where it's driving. And then you can press a button, and one of those taxis will start driving to you. And at least in San Francisco, it doesn't take more than 3 or 4 minutes for a black car to literally show up at your phone. And they know your name, and you've seen a picture of the driver on your phone, and vice versa. You've watched it drive up, and they open up the car, and you're good to go. It's a pretty remarkable experience. OpenTable creates a similar experience for restaurants. So if you're walking around in an urban area looking for a place to eat, You walk to your favorite neighborhood restaurant and there's a 2-hour wait. You want to know where you can go next. You open up a table, it knows where you are, it looks at the vicinity. You can obviously filter it any way you want to, but it not only shows you what restaurants are there, but what restaurants currently have availability right now, or when the nearest available reservation is. And so you can literally book there from your phone, and then walk across the street or hop back in your car, whatever you need to do, and move in. So basically a remote control that actually grabs a seat at the table. So that's the idea of remote controls for doing life's work. And this is actually, I think, one of the places where hardware becomes an interesting opportunity again. So if you imagine this as a remote control, there are lots of opportunities to extend that control through new hardware that enables things that haven't really been possible before. One of the more interesting third-party devices for iOS is what's called the WakeMate. And there are a number of these actually, but basically they're a system that talks to your phone and you wear it on your body or put it under your pillow or in some other way connected to you in your bed. And the system will wake you up in the morning when it's time to wake up without an annoying alarm that might also wake up your partner. Also, it can keep track of all sorts of data about how well you slept, how often you moved, and try and do some estimations on how effective your rest was for that night. That quantified self piece of this integration is really interesting, and there are a lot of products emerging to help you measure every bit of your activity in a number of different ways. I think 90 Fuel is the most effective so far. Fitbit won an award here at CES yesterday for their version of the same. The wristband seems to be the metaphor that's taking off. Jawbone has one as well. These are systems that count the number of steps that we take and how fast and far we run, and can log it into our social networks, and we can brag to our friends. In some cases, our friends can even watch us run in real time and cheer us on. Overplaying this music we're listening to in our headphones with actual sounds of clapping and craziness. This stuff is still really it's young and it's just getting going, but for people that are really into measuring their own behavior in various ways, there's lots of opportunities to do this that weren't really possible before. Nest, started by Tony Fadell, who was most famous for effectively creating the iPod, and the team have built this really, in every sense, a next generation thermostat for the home that's smart, that's much more efficient, and also easily controllable through mobile devices. So you can have full, pleasant control over the temperature of your home, turning it up and down. If you get on a plane to go to CES and remember that you forgot to turn it off, it's not a problem. If you're just in bed and you want it to be a little bit warmer or cooler, that's not a problem either. The integration between the two is quite deep. If you go to the Apple Store, you may find on the shelves a product called the Philips Hue, I believe. And this is basically a light bulb that fits into a standard light socket, but in every other way is a smart device that's fully controllable. It's a set of LEDs, and you can dial in any temperature you want for this or for a bank of them, and set mood lighting in your own home very easily through an Android device, an iPad, or an iPhone. One of the more interesting things I think that's happened lately, there's a new startup in San Francisco called Scoot. And Scoot is basically what happens when you take iPhones and very cheap Chinese scooters and dump them on top of each other. Rather than having a standard control surface on these scooters, there's just a little grid in the middle and a little case. And you pop your iPhone in this case with a special app. It knows who you are, it keeps track of how long you use the scooter, but it also gives you maps and navigation and throws your speed and tells you how much you spent and helps you find the next coffee shop and everything else. It's literally like a case for your phone that has wheels and a motor. It's really kind of crazy. But if you think about that as an extension, you can imagine how once this is my digital self, products that are specifically designed to integrate easily into with my digital self become remarkable opportunities to create really rich experiences with very shallow learning curves for the user. I know how to use this already, which means I know, assuming I can stay upright on a scooter, it means I know how to use Scoot already. And that's a win for everybody. The guys trying to get the business out the door don't have to spend tons of money on R&D, building specialized interfaces that are specific to this one problem. They can just build an app, they can launch it to the App Store, and everything else is coming to go. And the last opportunity is the one that excites me the most, and it's this idea of taking things that already exist, that we're already familiar with, that we use, and encouraging them into this next era. I think I like it personally, not because it's the most lucrative, but just because the problem here is really a design problem, and I'm wired as a designer. A great example of this is when Steve Jobs came back to Apple after his hiatus of being at Next and everything else. The industry had changed a lot, and when Steve left, arguably the world was still in personal computer land, that first era. By the time he came back, the second era was very much upon us, and the personal computer now needed to be a networked personal computer. But as often happens, the way that first emerged from a product perspective is that existing computers just kind of got more and more stuff bolted onto them. They got speakers and CD-ROMs attached. You often would have to go buy networking separately. You go pick out the modem that you wanted at the computer store, install it yourself. You'd go get something like Mozilla's Internet in a Box or one of these other products, and you install the software, and it would take quite a bit of work and quite a bit of savvy to pull all these pieces together to create a networked computer. And the moment that actually put Apple back on the map was to take this problem, synthesize it into the two things that they decided everybody wanted, which was to get on the internet easily and to get on the internet with as fast a connection as possible. And they combined that to create the iMac. And the iMac then, I'm getting my head shaked, no, we can talk about that in a minute. The iMac then really took off, in a small amount of time, became the #1 selling machine in its segment, and carried forward in a way that we're obviously all still seeing the consequences of. The color. Right, so one of the things, if you look at the translucent nature of that box, that was a desire to create transparency and friendliness, if you will, into an experience that historically was in every sense obfuscated and difficult. So Johnny Ive, this is, I think, the first thing that Johnny Ive really took lead design role on, and it's, in my opinion, a really good example of the deferential kinds of design that he takes moving forward, where the hardware is literally supposed to get out of the way and try and create an experience that dominates. So if you think about where we are now, we're in this third epoch of taking these computers that used to live on our desks and bringing them into our persons. And the natural way of thinking about that at first is going to be miniaturization, for lack of a better word. So this is a really funny little diagram that came from a children's book in the 80s, arguing that imagine one day when computers are so small that you can carry them around with you. And you can see there's a teeny tiny postage stamp size display and a speaker to the right of it, and then almost everything is preserved for hardware keys, and it's pretty big. This actually, ironically, does not look all that much different than the BlackBerries that were dominant before Apple's product came onto the market, and some people are still using it today. Often not by choice. I think the opportunity that really kicked this entire era into turbocharge mode, though, was when that same process of design simplification kind of tried to synthesize what the key differences were in this era compared to the eras before, and products that embraced those differences sort of became available and then took off in previously unimaginable rates. So in software, this happens too. Instagram, I think, is a great example of this. At first blush, Instagram looks like just an app that lets you take pictures, or maybe an app that lets you take pictures and add clever filters to them. But if you think about what's actually happening here, Instagram represents a fairly complicated synthesis of 3 pieces of the system that were available prior to these smartphones, being distilled to their kind of most essential components. So you could imagine going out with a nice digital SLR, taking a photo or a series of photos, picking the best one, bringing it into Photoshop, doing a lot of work to make that photo look, for lack of a better word, cool, and then take that cool photo and upload it to the social networks that you're a part of in order to get feedback of some kind on the picture that you took. For anybody that likes taking pictures, that was the workflow that was happening. And what Kevin Systrom did was he looked at each of those goals and made a linear workflow that was as absolutely simple as possible for allowing that to happen quickly. So You take the pictures with the camera on the phone, you're presented a series of filters that for most people are enough of a simple way to achieve that goal of getting the photo to look cool, to kind of skip that step of going into Photoshop and mucking with it. And then the network is literally right there. And in fact, it was so easy to just go ahead and share on Instagram itself that in spite of the fact that you could also one-touch share to Facebook and Twitter and all the rest, Instagram itself became a pretty remarkable destination and became so threatening to Facebook that Facebook then went and bought it for $1 billion. It's a really, really interesting moment in the sense that nothing there is new. Nothing that Instagram does could you not have done before. But by synthesizing that workflow into a very, very simplified experience that is specifically oriented for the devices that people are carrying around with them, the game changed dramatically. At Orchestra, where I work now, we are just about to launch this product that we call Mailbox. Mailbox is an intention to rethink email for this third epoch, the mobile era. Most everybody checks email on their phone. Most everybody hates email on their phone. And that's, in our perspective, a big opportunity. It's also a big problem. It's hard to take something as ubiquitous as email that everybody has such a deep relationship with and do something novel there that synthesizes that experience down. One could call that a really exciting design problem, which for us it is. It's also very hard technically because the protocols on which email runs are, in many cases, 30 years old. And we're certainly not designed for these lightweight, in terms of both processing and bandwidth, mobile devices that we carry in our pockets. Accessing your email quickly from an app that only gets the radio the second that you start the app is actually a pretty big technical challenge. And if you want to create a really fast, mobile-oriented experience, you have to rethink even how mail itself is organized and delivered and processed and basically reoriented for the mobile. This, incidentally, from a technical perspective, is what made BlackBerry such a hit for so long. They instituted a knock that allowed email to be sort of pre-formatted for mobile devices, and for a long time that gave them absolute market dominance. So I want to show real quickly a video that we released late last month for Mailbox, just to give you a sense of kind of how we're thinking about this. So our vision with Mailbox is to create a mobile-first experience that, because people have these computers on them at all times, not only takes better advantage of the interface affordances of the device, but actually shifts the focus of email in the same way that our focus shifts. If you go back with me for a second to the Starbucks story that we were talking about at the beginning, there are a lot of little moments of downtime in our days now where it's very natural to go to something like email and effectively perform triage. As we looked at email, triage, that moment of going through and sifting between the things that are most important and getting everything else out of the way, turns out to be the #1 use case for email on a mobile device. And so reorienting an email app around this concept of quickly processing mail as opposed to compressing the existing desktop metaphors into a mobile experience has become kind of a design goal for us. So those are the kind of 5 opportunity areas that I wanted to share with you guys today. And I don't know how much time we have left, but I think I'm happy to answer some questions or just get out of the way and let everybody go take a coffee break. I'm
What is all the first question?
Okay. I can have a many-day discussion on this. I'll refer to the IEEE Consumer Electronics magazine that came out today, plus 2 weeks from Sandy. I have an article. But basically, I feel like I'm a farmer, and the city folk have come in, paved all the orchards where the apples taste so good, and they forget about manure. And what's missing here is a sense of underlying technology capabilities that make it possible to do these apps. If these are the surface, that a few ones are designed, grows to the surface, but those are only a hint of what's really important under the surface, which is very messy, but is the opportunity that, the innovation, just go back to Gary's talk, is useless without opportunity. And I'm worried that we're focusing too much on the tail end of the process rather than enabling technologies. But that's, again, a long discussion, so I emphasize that these are more the devil's what you can do with this now, but only hint at what's possible. And I'm worried that Apple is starving us of manure.
I think it's a really good point. I mean, I'm almost certainly not the right person to speak to the technologies that are underlying these experiences. I think one of the things that's happening is as these products become more widely adopted, the technical acumen of the people using them goes down, and so preference for simplified experiences become more valuable.
But it's not, again, I want to discuss what people wanted. This is the problem with putting smarts into like the phone network rather than outside. So it's not the people, it's the innovator's dilemma problem. You spiral in towards one experience, and we need more disruption rather than more great experience.
Thanks for a very kind of interesting discussion and stuff. I didn't think all of those 5 big opportunities and others. I don't. So what we see, and I don't want to go to education, especially because of your psychology background and sociology and stuff like this. People right now, if you look at teenagers and stuff, they cannot even draw a 3D box, if you want. They don't know anything about technical drawing. Who needs it anymore, Emails, application you mentioned, people have an attention span of about 2 seconds, the emails are kind of about 2 lines, is a long email, nobody reads beyond the first paragraph. So, do you think the opportunity over there is also an opportunity somehow to get us back to this peace of mind, people really thinking about things rather than just Google the answer and then if it's actually a paper they need to read, they'll skip it, they'll go to some forum to look for the line. So is this anything relevant?
I think that's a great question. So if I can summarize the question, is that we live in an era of very small attention spans, skimming along the surfaces in a lot of areas that we used to have expertise at, and generally being utterly inundated with information. I think at the highest level that's probably not going to change, at least the aspect of access in some way being inundated. One of the things that becomes very interesting to me is curation. So beginning to increase specialization around actually information processing. So just as there are people who are dedicated 3D modelers and can make Pixar, even if I go sit down and spend a month trying to actually learn 3D modeling, I'll never be able to do anything equivalent to Pixar. There are people who, for every conceivable vertical of information, are becoming the experts in that area, and to begin to listen to them is to basically borrow their attention as your own. And so I think we're going to see increasingly, rather than cultivating the skill sets of focus across a wide gamut, beginning to trust experts that are curators in their various fields. And so I think in some senses that problem will become a more distributed, or the solution to that problem will become more distributed. But I've got a 5-year-old son, and we worry about this all the time. Like, I actually really enjoy watching him crafting things with his hands and cutting up paper, and he's very creative and in tangible ways. And we got him an iPad for Christmas, and that's slowly winning more and more of his time. It's a trade-off because the reality is that screen is going to become as essential to his experience as he grows into that world as you might think of as roads in a car are today. It's increasingly the medium through which so many of life's experiences are happening. He definitely needs fluency. He needs to be able to find information quickly. He needs to be able to learn how to process a seemingly unprocessable amount of information. But at the same time, we don't want him to become vapid. We don't want him to become, his eyes glazed over because he's just staring at a screen all the time and his skin to turn pale and him to forget about math. I mean, we have all these challenges too, and I think it's a tension we're going to have to hold as a society. There are a lot of wonderful things of having information at your fingertips for anything you can imagine, but there are downsides and risks as well.
You hear from some people that they think that email is going to disappear. Everybody sends messages to Facebook, but how do you think differently? Right?
Yes.
Why is that?
Great question. One I've been asked a fair bit. One of the things that we find exciting is that a lot of people have shied away from innovating on email because there's been this underlying assumption that it's going away. Certainly the data doesn't support this even a little. The amount of email being sent and read by people and the amount of people sending and reading emails continues to grow at pretty remarkable rates. But I think email is also a great example of what I like to call a we technology as opposed to a me technology. I might decide to buy, as you have, an extra battery charger for my iPhone to extend its range. And there may be a number of those on the market. And if I choose to use one, that's great. And if a better battery charger comes out next month, and I want to switch from my old battery charger to my new battery charger, I can do that. That's an individual technology that I've elected to use to improve some piece of my overall experience. Email, however, is a system that we collectively now embrace. And even if you decide individually that you're going to stop using email and you quit it cold turkey, email is still going to be coming to you. And it may be after that fourth or fifth event that you missed hearing about, or the change in plans that puts you at the restaurant on the wrong day or whatever. At some point, that will to stop checking email will give way to the reality that information that you need to know is still coming through that channel. And so people who try, myself included, to quit email eventually find themselves right back where they started. The only way that email is going to go away is if all of us decide at the same time to stop checking email for some other service or experience. And that's a very, very, very tall ask. I don't see it happening anytime soon.
There is a guy I met with Suarez who about 2 or 3 years ago started to use only maybe 10 emails a month. And he's a remote worker and he's still surviving that.
But he still sends 10, right?
Well, 10, yes.
So he's maybe found the far end of the spectrum of how much he can dial it back, but even he has to send some. Thanks.
You're absolutely right. Can you hear me better now? There we go. I was a little too tall. You're absolutely right. Yeah, we trust our phones to wait because even if it's so important transatlantic flight markets, will we ever get to the point, do you think, where we will trust our phones to do email triage based on natural language processing?
So the question, as I understand it, will we ever get to a place where we're actually trusting the email service provider or application to actually triage on our behalf?
Yes.
So that's actually happening already. I can give you a couple of examples that have been fairly popular in the marketplace. Gmail has a service called Priority Inbox that I would say is statistically not very successful, but for the people who are willing to make the plunge and try it, they find it quite powerful. Using sort of proprietary set of algorithms, Gmail determines which messages you're likely to care about, and it pulls those out. And there's a number of ways you can configure it, but you can configure it such that that's really the only email you ever look at. There's a third-party service called SaneBox that is similarly designed. It will take everything that it doesn't think is important and put it into a folder called bulk. And the idea is you can go into bulk if you want to and do some amount of triage there every once in a while, but the stuff that's not in bulk is the stuff the system has decided that you're interested in. And a lot of people swear by SaneBox. We see plenty of opportunity for that kind of intelligence in mailbox over time, and we think that there's lots of ways that we can be doing that to really help. But I would say, actually, there's a version of this triage happening already for every single one of us at an unbelievable level that we don't even think about because it works so well. That's junk mail filtering. some estimates, 99% of all emails sent never gets to the inbox of the recipient because it's pre-flagged as spam and routed either at the server level or at the client level to some kind of junk or bulk folder. And those algorithms have gotten much better over time. At first, people would go check their junk mail all the time. Stuff still gets lost in junk mail, but far less than it used to, and the systems are going to continue to be increasingly intelligent. So I think the answer is yes. I think it's already happening, and these systems will simply just get smarter and smarter as time goes on.
I recently heard a talk by Sherry Turkle, who you probably know.
I'm not sure that I do.
She's a professor at MIT. She's a psychologist. But her life work has been considering the psychological impact of the connected world, I guess. She reports, she doesn't seem to make value judgments, but reports that people are not talking to one another. You go into a situation where in the past people would smile and talk and maybe comment with one another, and today you see everyone on his or her phone, his or her pad, texting, surfing, and so forth. And she said this situation is getting worse, is getting more normal, rather than less. And I'm just wondering whether you have any thoughts on where the asymptote would be reached. Are people going to be talking to one another? Is speech going to disappear?
That's a great question. Certainly my mind went immediately to this slide, and if you've ever spoken to someone who's wearing one of these devices, it's a very disconcerting experience because you don't really know, except if you can look for that kind of cross-eyed, glassy thing. You don't really know whether they're paying attention to you or they're surfing. We probably all had the experience of being at a dinner table with someone that we meant to have a nice face-to-face conversation with, and they looked at their phone too often. I'm certainly guilty of this, and I've heard many of my friends and loved ones, crazy by doing it. One of my friends that actually has a kind of a standing tradition when they get together, everybody takes their phones and they drop them in the middle of the table. And the first person who can no longer resist the urge to check their device ends up picking up the tab for the whole meal. And it's a nice, forceful way to encourage some face-to-face time again. I think we're social creatures, and we all benefit from the kinds of communication that can only happen person to person. The nonverbal stuff is extremely important, and that's where a lot of intimacy comes from. It's definitely not going away. There's a competition for our attention like there never has been before, and similarly to the information overload question, I think there's always going to have to be a balance that's struck. I certainly don't know where the asymptote is, but the tension does feel very real and only getting more heightened.
What's your final? I can tell you this is the last question. It's not a question, it's a comment. You probably saw the smooth technical facility in which Gentry presented his stuff. That was kind of, we had to go through some a complicated process of re-engineering here. And I'd like to thank Artie Bieber, who sit here on the first row, who helped us a lot in doing that. And also Chris Washington, who made it from Las Vegas and gave some advice. And also the help of people of the Apple Store. And above all, the AP people, Jack Kellum and Lionel, I don't know his last name. So without them, it would not be possible to have the presentation flows, not just from a content point of view,